Welcome to the Hustle and Flow podcast.
A platform we use to explore varying perspectives and opinion through candid conversation.
We chat about philosophy, business, and all things life. I'm Shaun the Hustle.
And I'm Les the Flow.
Let's go.
All right, guys. Today we've got a very special guest with us. Her name is Sally Hetherington OAM. She's the CEO and founder of Humans and Hope Incorporated, a Cambodian-run community centre which aims to alleviate poverty in Cambodia through grassroots, empowering projects focused on education, vocational training, and community development. She's also the author of It's Not About Me. Her manifesto of stories and learnings taken from her years of volunteer work and raising awareness about the unintended consequences of voluntourism. So, without further ado, thanks for joining us, Sally. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So we've heard a little bit about you now, Sally, but I think what would be really interesting for our listeners would be to hear about your origin and where Sally Hetherington comes from and how she's come to be the woman she is today.
Well, it all started on a sunny day in 1986 when I was induced 2 weeks after I was due. Just wanted to stay at home, and that's why I still live with my parents. But my real origin story, I suppose, starts when I was 25, because up until that time, I hadn't really cared about others so much, but I had this real epiphany, I suppose, and I ended up taking a career break and moving to Cambodia. And I was going to be there for 15 months and working as a volunteer coordinator at a school for disadvantaged children, because I honestly thought that the way forward in development and the way for communities to move themselves out of poverty was by having foreigners come and help them do that. So for that first year, I was managing these short-term foreign volunteers at this school who were like teaching English and working on farms and painting classrooms. But as time went by, what I saw was that the local staff were disempowered, because think about it, here you are doing your job, but then a foreigner comes in and tells you, no, wait, I can do it better. And then we had these children who were having attachment issues because these volunteers were coming from 1 week to 1 month, and it was just this revolving door. So the children who were already in these vulnerable situations would attach themselves to the volunteers, and then the volunteers would leave and it would cause mental health issues for them. And I just saw that there was no long-term sustainability with this, because for communities to develop, it needed to be the locals taking charge, because they know the community and the culture well, and they're there for the long term, and they're really the subject matter experts, because they know what's worked before, what hasn't worked, what could work, and taking all of this into account. So after that moment, I was like, crap, what can I do? I can move back to Australia with my tail between my legs, or I can try and stay at this organisation and make change from within. But that organisation wasn't willing to change because they were so dependent on these foreign volunteers as a source of income, because a lot of people who go overseas and volunteer have to pay funds for the privilege of volunteering, which is a whole other issue. And I thought, well, if I go back to Australia, that's a year wasted, a year where I've had this negative footprint, and I'm not okay with leaving that negative footprint on this country that has suffered so much in the past and has so much potential, because they're so resilient and resourceful, and I want to help get that potential out there. So luckily, around this time when I was having the epiphany, I was introduced to this nightly English school, and it was called Human and Hope Association, and it was run by Cambodian volunteers and sometimes foreign volunteers at this Buddhist pagoda, because they had seen that there was absence of education in their community, and they knew that education is the key to lifting people out of poverty. So I thought, okay, this is fantastic. This is what I want to do. So working together with that team, we said, okay, Sally will come in. She will work alongside us, side by side, and we will develop this organisation into a reputable not-for-profit organisation that's trusted by the community, that has really outcomes-focused projects that can lift communities out of poverty. But Sally has to make herself redundant, and we can't have any foreign volunteers. So this organisation will now become entirely run by the local staff who are there for the long term. And so that's where I then spent the next few years developing this amazing organization. We built our own community center in rural Siem Reap, and we have all these programs that are focused on education and training and community development, and not putting the onus on moving out of poverty on one person. It's a whole family who has that opportunity instead. And that's my origin story. I then made myself redundant, and it was the proudest day of my life. Yeah.
That's amazing. Sounds like you've traversed quite an interesting path so far.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much in there that I would love to unpack.
Yeah.
And you actually said something which I think was easy to gloss over, but I picked up that you said up to 25, you didn't really care about anyone else much.
Mm.
And clearly that's changed for you, because it sounds like your life's work after that has been about empowering other people. And with that comes obviously caring about people a great deal. So what kind of changed for you around that 25-year mark?
Some things had been leading up to it. This sounds really silly, but first it was seeing the movie Blood Diamond when I was like 19 or 20, and I just saw how much suffering there was. And I grew up in a middle-class family. Although both my parents are immigrants, I never thought about anything that they'd gone through. And it was then that I started donating to a charity. And when I was 22, I then went on family holiday to Myanmar, because my grandmother's actually from Myanmar. And this wasn't too long after the cyclone that killed 130,000 people. And it was when I was there, I was like, holy crap, this could have been my life. You know, I'm so fortunate to live in Australia. I need to start doing stuff for people who are just suffering so much. And that's when I started to get into volunteer work in Australia and everything. And then it all led up to preparing me with the skills and the corporate skills in my corporate job to then be able to make that move to Cambodia when I was 25 and just focus on that full time.
Okay, there we go. So there was like a bit of an epiphany moment there as well for you when you're in Myanmar, and
yeah,
that when you saw that movie.
Yes, I've had a few epiphanies in my life, funnily enough.
That's beautiful, because it seems, I think sometimes people have those types of epiphanies, but what you do about it is what really matters, I think. And it seems that you've done some very powerful things as a result of the epiphanies you've had.
I've always been someone to take action. Like, I remember when I said to a friend of mine, I'm going to move to Cambodia. And he said, no, you're not. You're not going to do that. But then another friend said, I know you are, Sally, because you're somebody who will always action. You don't just say something. And that's why it took me so long to decide to write a book, because I knew that once I committed to it and I said, I'm going to write a book, I would have to do it, because I don't like to put false information out there into the world. I like to follow up on my promises and my declarations, I suppose.
Yeah. And what a good quality to have, because I think it's very easy to get wrapped up in intentions, but it's really the action that serves, right?
Definitely. It's all about the action and taking informed action. And that's something why I do speak out against voluntourism, because I was a voluntourist myself. I went to Cambodia for a month and I played with children. I think I taught them stuff, but it was really about the impact that had on me. And that's because I just felt compelled, and I thought that was the best way to go. And a lot of people will see suffering and they'll just act without thinking. And like my book says, it's not about us. It's about, we have to think about what's the best for the community members that we are trying to help, whether that is in Cambodia or rural Australia, because you can have such unintended consequences that can mess people up for life without you even thinking about it. So it's really important to think carefully, though, before you do take that action.
And it's such a powerful action or powerful statement, even in a general sense. It's not about me, right? Because I feel like it's something that can be applied in all instances of life, in a lot of situations as well. Like we're all experiencing COVID-19 right now. It's mid-May as we're recording this, and I think that that same statement could be said, for many people's actions that have been taken throughout this whole process of pushing against self-isolation, basically, and all of those sorts of things. So I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into what the book is about, Sally, if you could.
Sure. So the book really starts with the first time I went to Cambodia on holiday in 2009, and when I hadn't realized what a horrific history they had, because again, I was in my little eastern suburbs bubble, and I learned that between 1975 and 1975, over 2 million Cambodians were killed by their own people. That was a quarter of the population, and that was through genocide, and that was through starvation and overwork and disease, and it's just horrific. And even after the regime officially, unofficially finished, there was still a lot of suffering and death. And when I went to Cambodia on that holiday, I thought, how could a country overcome this? And what is a way that I can help them to do that? Because think about it, for a country that has been forced into this horrible labor and a genocide for so long, how can they actually rebuild? And that was the start of my journey to where I am today. And so the book really details a lot of different stories. Some are heartbreaking, some are really funny, some you really cringe at. And for the people who have read it, I keep getting feedback that these are aha moments for them, that they realize what I thought was the best way to help somebody in a country like Cambodia isn't actually right. I talk about how these Japanese tourists turned up at the school one day with face painting and balloon stuff, and they said, we're going to paint these kids' faces. It's like, you don't know these kids. Do you think that I could go to my local public school and be like, hello, here I am with face paint, let me just paint these kids' faces? No, there's child protection issues. There's so many issues. But unfortunately, when we go to countries who are lower income than us in Australia, a lot of people, their common sense just goes out the window. And I was exactly the same. So it's not judging people, but it's getting people to learn from my mistake and others' mistakes, and just getting them to try and rethink the best way to help people and what an impact they can have accidentally, a negative impact.
Mm. And that's it's a super poignant note to take. And like I said, it's about, you know, understanding what is best for everyone else within a certain context, not what we feel is the collective best or collective good, you know. And that's a super interesting, I guess, angle to delve a little bit deeper down. So my thoughts is that, look, generally speaking, when we're talking about wider society, there is like a overarching collective belief of what is right and wrong, what is status quo, what is best. And I guess you might have come across this, like, you know, in terms of your perception of what voluntourism was and then what it actually is whilst being in there. So can you talk more into that in terms of how that sort of realization popped out, and, like, you know, what were the, you know, the key factors that sort of came out for you?
So what I saw was, and I did the exact same thing, was people coming in with what they thought was the right solution to problems. But how can I go to Bangladesh and stop domestic violence when I have not been born in Bangladesh? I don't know the culture. I don't know that community. I don't know all the underlying issues of why there is domestic violence and how we can stop it. So there would be no point me going to Bangladesh and enacting that project. And that's what a lot of people do, is they go to countries like Cambodia to build a house. But what about when you are building a house? Why can't a local builder build the house who really needs that income? What's going to happen to all of the maintenance when you leave? Does that family actually need a house? Are they going to become more dependent on aid? Do you trust the organization that you're working with? There's just so many issues to unpack. But it's a message that we have been sold by these voluntourism companies, and a lot of non-for-profit organizations have unfortunately gone down that route because that's what the demand is. It's just like with orphanages. The Australian government, thankfully, is saying don't go visit orphanages because 80% of children in orphanages worldwide have at least one living parent, and we are fueling the demand. So there are all of these orphanages popping up overseas because we like to go there and give some toys, play with the children, feel good about ourselves. But these children are being torn from their families, and kids who are raised in these residential institutions are 500 times more likely to commit suicide than kids who are raised in a family environment. And unfortunately, because we are demanding it, they are supplying it. And we need to be thinking it's not us and them, it's we. I am optimist when I think I want equality in the world. It's not just good enough to say, oh, here's some food to a homeless person, and if they don't like it, say, oh, you should be grateful for that. No, everyone deserves dignity and respect and quality education and everything like that. I could go on for hours about that, but I won't.
And there's something so interesting that I think a lot of us don't think about. It's like the demand that we create. And it makes me think about, I've been to India a number of times since I was a child. I've got family there as well. And, so I was exposed to different types of poverty very early on. And you realize, after you go there a certain time and you get older and you understand what's actually happening, and it's what you're talking about, the demand you create. And it makes me think of that movie Slumdog Millionaire, right? Where you see the children there that are actually groomed by essentially what are pimps, these children that are, and these things happen. People think that it's sensationalized for a movie, but it's their reality for so many people, and they're being exploited. And things happen like mothers with children who are drugged to stay asleep so that they don't cry, so that the mother can go car to car to beg. And, it's, I guess people feel that they're helping in that moment when they give someone money or that they give them food or they give them something, but we're really fueling that. And it's a hard situation, I think, for a lot of people to be in if you haven't been exposed to it. And it sounds really insensitive, like, oh, I'm not going to give money to that person. It's like, well, you're not going to help them then. But you're actually helping them by not doing what's being expected of you and fueling that demand. And it's such a tricky spot to be in because you're in this conflict, right? And I think that's the issue with voluntourism for people, is you think you're doing a good deed, but in fact you're doing the opposite. And it's hard for people to reconcile. It
is very hard, and everybody wants to feel needed and wanted, and that's what voluntourism is. It's taking advantage of that emotion. And there are still people now who will fight to the death to keep voluntourism alive. And I'll be really interested to see where the industry goes now with COVID-19. But I'm hoping that this situation shows people why localization is the best. Because you know what, right now, the team in Cambodia from Human and Hope Association, they are responding in a very timely manner to the needs of their community who have just been hit so hard by those economic implications. Because in Siem Reap, it's a tourist town. So many people have lost their jobs. There is no employment for people. So our team in Cambodia then worked with the local commune chief, and he's like, food. There's so much food insecurity, that's what they need. So here, my job is to fundraise, to get them that money so then they can go and do whatever the community needs, because they're the ones who can respond. And at the end of the day, when all of these foreigners have had to go back to their countries or Peace Corps volunteers pulled out of country, it's the locals who stay. So that's why it's so important that they are there and all of these initiatives are run by locals. It's not my place to be saying, this is what you need to do. Because even now, I get it wrong. Even now, if I'm talking to our managing director in Cambodia about a grant and he has an idea and I'll say, you know what, I don't think that grant organization will go for that. How about this? And he'll say, no, Sally, that doesn't work. And I'm still educating myself every day to not step over the line, because I think that I know a solution having lived there for 5 years. But no, I could live there my whole life and I wouldn't understand properly everything that goes on in Cambodia.
Mm. And it's such a an aware way of, I guess, perceiving what it is that you're looking at that point in time, Sally. I mean, and like you said, it's almost like a continual educational process, self-educational process that you need to pull yourself back when you feel it's required, especially when trying to apply certain things and you feel you know best. And I think that, again, is something that can be applied in so many other different contexts, right? In terms of a general understanding or knowledge and applying expectations across the broad, like a broad stroke, right? And just saying, it works here, why wouldn't it work there? But obviously there's so much to it, more to it than just this black and white cookie cutter approach to all things, right?
For sure. And something, if I were to initiate a program in my neighborhood in Northmead, that program might not actually work in Cabramatta because they're very different cultures in themselves. There's no cookie cutter approach, as you've said. Everybody needs to be treated as an individual. And I think that's really the power of grassroots organizations, is because they can go out and work with individuals and treat them individually. Like our sewing program in Cambodia only allows 6 women in each class because they need to be treated individually and working on all of the issues that they're facing and mentoring them and helping them overcome all of these obstacles. But if there was a class of 20, which I've seen other not-for-profit organizations go for, it just doesn't work as effectively, and the outcomes won't be as effective. And it should always be quality over quantity.
Yeah, totally. I want to take a couple of steps back to this concept of voluntourism and also expand upon this notion that Shaun mentioned as well, in terms of like the demand that we create for it, right? And I want to get your thoughts on it in terms of why you think that, you know, it is almost something that is put on a pedestal sometimes, you know. And I'm talking about, you know, the act of philanthropy in general. I think that from my perspective, again, without judgment, this is purely observation of the lay of the land. It is what it is, right? I think that these sorts of acts are almost glamorized, and you know, there's a level of vanity towards it, because you'll see utilization of social platforms to sort of advertise that, hey, I'm doing a good deed here, and you want to get those sorts of that attention that way. And again, I'm not in a place to judge anyone and say that it's right or wrong. It's just an observation, and I don't know whether those intentions are completely pure or not, or whether there are other ulterior motives behind it. But I want to get your thoughts on that. I know that it's not really a question. It's like this whole thing that I've thrown at you, but, you know, speak to it if you can.
And when I give all of my opinions, I can give it because it's exactly a place where I have been, and then I've been enlightened and I'm able to say, hey, I made a mistake. And I can tell you, when I went and was a volunteerist for a month, all you saw on my Facebook for the month and months afterwards was me holding cute little kids, and me with cute little kids on my back, me teaching cute little kids how to dance. And that got a lot of likes, and that got a lot of commendation from people. Sally, you're so amazing, you're so good, because social media has just made this explode. And I sometimes, when I don't know why I do this, but I just think, hey, let me stress myself out, and I will search voluntourism on Instagram and I will go through these photos of people participating in it, and it sickens me. Honestly, it sickens me, because I'm just think, can you please take a step back and think, is it okay for you to be posting photos with these children? Have their parents given permission? Have their guardians given permission? Do they understand what this is being used for? You know, the whole social media thing, and it's taking some humanity away from people, because I don't know how often you see this, but I'm always seeing videos of people doing good deeds, which is fantastic.
Totally.
They're putting the person that they are helping in the spotlight, and it's not fair on them. They haven't asked to do that. It's just like when we gave out a microfinance loan and we posted about it on Facebook, and that microfinance borrower got really angry with us because she said, now my community, they're mocking me. They know that I took a loan from you guys. And I said, well, you know what? You signed a contract that allows us to take the photos and post them in return for that microfinance loan. So legally we were right, but ethically we were not right. I made a huge mistake there, because you are putting people's personal information out there and thinking, oh, well, this will raise more funds. But you need to be having a good balance between respecting the dignity of people who are individuals, who are humans. They're not tourist attractions. They're not there to be put on show, and also trying to fundraise. And again, it's about changing the narrative and changing the way that we present things so that donors will understand, hey, you know what? I shouldn't be seeing a photo of this impoverished, starving child. That's, you know, like the 1980s when they used to do that. Let's be showing hope. And that's why right now when Human and Hope are going out and giving out those care packages, they are not showing the faces of the people that they're supporting, because they don't want to be in that situation, and they don't want to be receiving food but at a price, and that's putting their image out there for everybody to see that they can't afford to feed themselves. It's not fair. And social media has done that, and a lot of people do put this stuff on social media, but I am happy to say that there are some unsung heroes who will go about, do their work, like foundations who will just give money and not post about it. And so there's half and half, I would say, but we need to really be respecting what we're doing on social media.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a massive part. That word respect. It's really clear that everything that you've approached has been with respect, and that you've learnt that along the way. And I guess that's one thing that people don't consider all the time is, are you respecting the person who's in front of you and what their wishes are and how they want to traverse the world? Because it can really impact them, like that person who you're saying that you gave that microfinance loan to. It would have helped them tremendously, but it also detracted from their life in a certain way too. And you were able to understand that and comprehend that, and that comes from having respect for them.
Yeah, definitely. And you need to, I have made so many mistakes in my life in regards to development, and I still do make some mistakes. And the important thing is that I recognize, I learn from it, and I always try to explain my mistake to others so that they don't make the same mistake. Because some people say to me, yeah, Sally, your message is really good, but I think some people have to go there and learn that themselves. No, then that defeats the whole purpose. What you're doing is you're making other people your playthings, and you're playing with people's lives, and you might not see it, but good intentions are not good enough, and you really need to be researching this. And there are enough books and articles on the downsides of voluntourism to be educating people on this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's so powerful, that statement you just made, which is good intentions are not good enough.
Yeah.
And it might sound harsh to some people, but it's a reality. It's a reality.
Definitely. It is hard for me to balance my message so people don't feel they're being judged, while also getting that message out there. And if anybody is listening and they're feeling judged, I'm not judging you, but I want you to learn from the mistakes and take it seriously and do your research.
Yeah, I think that's the key there, right? In terms of if you have the good intentions there, then you but what that encompasses is a level of respect and care for what you're doing, and with that comes that real deep research, analysis, understanding of what you're stepping into, and that shows a true passion towards what it is that you're diving into, not just some sort of surface level endeavor just because it seems like it's a good idea, but we're too lazy to sort of go into it a bit further and understand what it's truly about for not only yourself but whoever it is you're trying to help.
Yeah. And I do say there is a way you can help, and you can't do it right now, but it's ethical travel. So when you do want to go overseas, don't go and be a volunteerist. Instead, map out your journey and try and support social enterprises. So then the people who are being trained, they get direct benefit, and they can learn how to be cooks and waiters with these social enterprises, and you're supporting to keep those alive, and buy from local small businesses so that money goes to that parents and they can pay for an education for their child. And be respectful when you go to a different culture. Research it and make sure that you are dressing appropriately, acting appropriately, and be respectful when you're taking photos. And definitely do not buy anything from street children, because that traps them in the cycle of poverty. If you do feel that urge, and it was like Shaun was saying in India, you really want to help, but if you ever feel the urge to give to a street child, instead find an organization that you can donate to instead, because they're the ones who are working on the ground to try and stop this.
And I'd also like to delve more down the path of empowerment. and how that actually changes lives. Because I've got other friends as well who have dedicated their lives to empowering other people, and you see that it's really the key. It's that old adage of give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, but teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime.
Mm.
And skills and things that you teach people are really what does empower them. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. And it's about going further and providing an empowering environment. I used to say, I'm empowering these people, but somebody said, you know what, Sally, no, you're providing an empowering environment. And the way that I did that was to always make sure that I was equal with everybody, because there was always this preconceived notion that because I was a foreigner, I was richer and better, even though it totally wasn't. So I would never earn more than my counterparts when I was in Cambodia, which is why I'm so poor now. But also, we would have weekly training sessions, and at first I would run those training sessions, but then the local staff built up their confidence, so then they would run those training sessions, and then I wouldn't need to do that. Or we would make sure that they had regular feedback sessions, which was hard to begin with at first because there's a whole losing face culture in Cambodia, but it was about slowly making sure people understood that constructive feedback is okay, and that is how they can develop and grow. And that was, I think, the most Western thing I ended up putting in there, but that's something that they've continued today, is constructive feedback, and funding university scholarships for the staff so they could go out and get more knowledge to do better in their jobs, and just making sure that people felt listened and heard. And nowadays, when they receive like amazing results for their education program, for example, 90% pass rate, and the local staff say, this was us, we did this all by ourselves. And that's why the staff turnover is so low. The staff only leave when they have to get married and move to another city, because they feel such ownership, and local ownership is so important to feel empowered. And then they're now training their skills into the community. And both of our sewing teachers are graduates from the sewing program. They've learnt sewing from Human and Hope. Now they're teaching other women sewing. And to me, that's the real empowering environment.
Sure. And also, you have this interesting notion of making yourself redundant. Because, for a lot of people, that would be scary. And also, I would imagine that once you've found a purpose such as this one, and it would be fulfilling, it would be very hard to want to let go of that feeling.
Definitely. It was really, really hard. I cried so much on my last day there, but it was one of sadness, because I knew that I had to leave my team. Even right now I get emotional about it, but it was also pride, because they didn't need me. And it's like I've said, people they like to feel needed and wanted, but I had to feel really proud that I wasn't needed, because they are amazing, and it was like, this is what we set out to achieve. And from day one, I always said, I'm going to make myself redundant. So we had that goal to work towards. And that's why we were successful, because everything we did, we thought, okay, Sally's not going to be here. When one of our staff was complaining that at university, the whole class was them watching the same video every week, I said, you need to complain. He said, can you do it for me? I said, I would love to, because I love to complain. But what happens when I'm not here? So then he got his classmates together and they went to the university and made a complaint. And so it was always just keeping that in the mind. Hey, I'm not going to be here. You need to just step up and do it.
And how did you come to that goal, though, at the very beginning, to make yourself redundant?
It was after that year that I was working at that school, when I just saw that there was no end in sight for them for not having foreign volunteers anymore. And that's just really made me determined that organizations need to be completely run by Cambodians, and they have a governing Cambodian board, and it's really amazing. And I really hope that other organizations see this as the way forward, and that they see Human and Hope as role models for what they can achieve.
Amazing work. And I think it's such a brave step as well, in terms of stepping out of what a conventional mold is, if with regards to the space that you're in. and you stepped into, it would be very easy for you to simply turn a blind eye, because I can imagine that it was very left of field and very difficult for you to do what you needed to do and establish, the grassroots the way you did, and able to break the mold of how it was traditionally run, So how does that sort of lay of the land look generally in the field in comparison? Is it something that is trending, or is it something that is still quite new?
It's still quite new, but again, I'm really hoping for those organizations that do survive COVID, because the economy is just terrible in Cambodia, that they might see this as the way forward, or they might just go backwards and try and get more volunteers for more cash, because that's what they're reliant on. But we were lucky, because from the beginning, although there were foreign volunteers before I got there, once I was there, we never relied on that income. So that was easier for us to just go with our values. And you're right, it really was left field. And even today, people get annoyed with me with my opinion, but I've got that lived experience, and we can show this really amazing success story from Human and Hope. And last year, we got to bring Human and Hope Cambodia's managing director to Australia. It was his first time overseas, and he and I went and spoke at universities about this. And they were like, wow, that man knows his stuff. We understand why it needs to be him and his community doing this.
Mm. And I think it's such a nice display and example of, I guess, understanding the problem at its roots, right? And not making any assumptions and simply applying these Band-Aid solutions to things. And that's sort of the approach of voluntourism to some degree, right? It's like, we do need money, and we're sort of plugging a gap, so to speak, and it's doing the job per se that it needs to do, but the long-term ramifications, those are the things that are unseen and behind closed doors, or long lasting after a volunteer has left.
Definitely. And something from the beginning was that we were never going to risk our values for money. And that is still the same today. I still have people say, can I come and run a workshop for the staff? Can I come and take photos? Can I do a pen pal program? And this is all stuff that we don't do. So we say no. And unfortunately, if you don't want to give your money, then that's just what happens, because once you start selling out for money, your values slip away really quickly.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
For sure. And there's another thing, and I learned this from Les, which is help is a request. And I think so often that we, for whatever reason, we want to impose our will on other people, and we mask it as help. And it's really either we want to be right, or we want to feel a certain way, or we want an outcome, and we mask it in what's called help. And it goes back to what you were saying, which is, the face painting example. Like, the kids probably don't want their faces painted by people they don't know. But you want to feel good about, you think it will make a child happy because that's your preconceived notion of what makes kids happy. And I think, it's so important to think about what is the actual will and desires of those other people on the other side that you are, quote unquote, trying to help.
Yeah, exactly. All of these stuffed toys aren't going to take them out of poverty. It's education, most likely, that will take them out of poverty. And I once went out with a not-for-profit organization. They needed me to take photos for something, and it was them giving out toys and shoes and all this stuff to villagers. And I remember it was chaotic, absolutely chaotic. Like, people were taking out 10 pairs of shoes at a time and taking stuff, stealing stuff. And once it was all over and people walked back to their houses, I saw some of those toys discarded on the road. It meant nothing. And that's why you also have to be really careful about direct aid. And that's why at the moment, the team in Cambodia, the emergency food packs that they're giving out, they're like, this is a short-term situation. This isn't going to be ongoing, because we can't make people dependent on us, and when there's this dependency, then there's less likeliness of moving out of poverty, and it's this whole big issue, but you have to be really careful with all of that stuff.
And I think being mindful of I keep coming back to it, but like respecting other people and their culture is such an important thing because of how they receive things or where they've come from and what they've experienced. I could imagine, if you've been in a war-torn country and experienced, food shortage and you've been forced to work without any result, getting resources would be something that you would welcome. But long term, perhaps they're not best equipped for the experience of how that fares for them down the path and how that fares for their wider environment, society going down the road.
Definitely. And that's why we used to have a 50% retention rate in the sewing program back in 2013. And now that's about 92% because some villagers would just say, yep, I'm going to do this. But they didn't realize it's a 12-month commitment for them to actually get that skill and go through this comprehensive program. And then it would be their family who would say, nah, you've got to go out and earn money now, because that's, $1 today is better than earning $5 a day in the future, because you get the money now. And a lot of them didn't understand why it was so important. And that was a real hurdle for our local team to overcome. But they learned a lot of lessons, even about their own community, when doing that. You can't force people into it either. And help needs to be a request, like Leslie said.
And that's so interesting. I'd love to sort of delve a little bit deeper with that. Because I guess, like you said, it was a bit of a hurdle for you to sort of, relay that concept to people. And especially, and again, it's hard for us to immediately look at because we don't experience that level of desperation that people in, war-torn countries may have, or, less fortunate countries like third world countries and things like that. How was that experience in, relaying that sort of different perspective or mindset to people to see the wider picture of the world and what that meant for them?
So our local staff are so amazing in that they've used education to get themselves out of poverty. So they are seen as role models in the community. But a lot of the time they go out there and they don't have success. I would say half of the time they're successful, half of the time they're not, because you just have this idea that's so ingrained in the culture about you need to be working today to survive. You can't invest that time in education. So it's always difficult for them to overcome. But for them, it's just about perseverance, just constantly persevering and then celebrating the successes. Because if you just get so down about the horrible situations that's happening, you just never get any work done. You'll just fall into a hole. And yesterday I was getting really sad when I saw photos of the houses. You can't even call them houses. It's 4 pieces of wood with a roof, where people are living at the moment and who are needing these emergency food packages. And it's so heartbreaking. But if you just keep focusing on that, the heartbreaking aspect, you're never going to be able to progress forward. Just have to keep going, keep swimming.
And when you are in that feeling, when you're feeling down, you see, how do you personally get yourself out of that feeling to start swimming again?
I'm just very focused, and like I was drowning last month in work and the feeling of, oh no, fundraising sources are going to go down because of COVID. But what I just did was focused. I worked my ass off. So I'm taking a bit of a break now, like only working 10 hours a day at the moment, because I just have to focus on the end goal. And that's what will get you there. It was just like when we wanted to make myself redundant, just always focusing on the end goal and focusing on your why and your purpose. And then that's how I never stay down for too long, thankfully. Just focus.
And it's so important. It's an important message to sort of look at, no matter what it is that you're focused on, and whatever the changing environment presents to you, that you have to adjust and pivot. And the end goal is always something that you need to reach, regardless of what the path looks like in front of you.
Definitely. And I mean, we had planned this virtual Walk to Cambodia fundraiser. I'd been planning it with my volunteers for maybe 3 months, and then suddenly we couldn't do these in-person social walks anymore because of COVID. So I was able to really quickly pivot and get online classes instead. And we more than doubled our income from the event last year. We raised $12,700 in a month from the participants of this because we were able to just pivot. And I'm like, let's work hard, let's do it. And I was contacting organizations who had previously supported us. Even when they said no, I said, okay, keep us in mind. And then suddenly they'd be like, yes, we can support you. And just keep going. Don't let the no's knock you down, because sometimes they actually then turn into yeses as well.
A good lesson in tenacity for people, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what is it that you're focused on right now, immediately in this moment?
Immediately in this moment, I'm working on some really boring policy documents for our organisation, but I'm also focusing on our end of financial year appeal, because we do need to get funding for our sewing program for 12 more women. And it is quite an investment. It's $1,200 to put one woman through a 12-month sewing program. So that's why it can be a hard sell, but the outcomes show how important that is. Yeah, so that's what I do here. I run Human and Hope Australia, and I do fundraising and advocacy. And I go out to universities and I run these workshops, and I say, let's not automatically jump on a plane and go overseas. Let's think about other ways you can help, through ethical travel, through advocating for an issue that's close to your heart here, by fundraising for the cause. You know, there's so many other ways that you can help without going and participating in voluntourism.
Awesome. And if there was a message that you wanted to give to our audience, one message, and I'm sure that there's many that you wanted to provide, but what would it be to our audience that you'd want to share with them or advocate for?
I would say that's a tough one. For me, my personal mantra is never give up. But for the audience, if they were looking for a message, it's do your research.
Mm-hmm. And how about on the back of, Human and Hope? Anything that you want to spread to our audience and just let them to get involved from that point of view?
Well, there are so many ways you can get involved. And right now you can purchase our ethically made products, which are made by our sewing graduates, like produce bags, bamboo straws and pouches, toys. You can also become a monthly donor, which is just $10 a month, provides a month of education for a child in need. Or you can also come on our ethical tours once it gets back up and running next year to Cambodia, so you can understand more about my message, because it's there that you really do learn about the resilience and the resourcefulness of the Cambodian people and how to be an ethical traveller. And that's something that you can take through life. Yeah,
beautiful. And where can they find out about that, Sal?
humanandhope.org.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. We'll chuck all that information on the show notes.
Thank
and Shaun, where can people find out more about you, mate?
Yeah, easiest place to find me is on Instagram, just Shaun_Coop, SHAUN_COOP. And how about you, Les?
Yeah, just on my website, findingspace.co, and through socials as well at findingspace.co. You can also reach Shaun and I for any queries or questions or feedback about the podcast if you want to be a guest or whatever it is. The Hustle and Flow podcast at gmail.com.
And Sally, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you and all the great work you've done. And, it's very clear, this is the first time I met you, but that you've dedicated a large portion of your life to empowering other people. And I really admire that. And I'm sure that a lot of people around you have really benefited from the dedication you have to your mission. So I just want to acknowledge that. And thank you for doing what you do for the people of the world.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I thank everybody who has also helped me on the journey, because I do have a really good tribe.
And that's another thing, I guess, which you've been able to explain to people today, is like empowering your environment and how important that is. And that, as a collective, we're able to do a lot of good.
Definitely.
Yeah. And for all of our listeners today, if you learned some things today, I learned a lot about voluntourism today. And, it's really sparked that conversation I'll be having with myself in my own mind about how we actually help and the demand that we create. If that's something that you've thought about as well, or there's someone you'd like to share this message with, we ask that you just share this with one other person. It's how we grow the podcast. I'd love to get these conversations in the ears of other people, so it intrigues and sparks some thoughts for them too. So please just share it with one other person on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. And until next time, guys, thanks for listening.
Thanks, Sal. See you guys.